The enslaved crewmen of the Planter dared meet at Small's apartment to finalize their escape plans. They went over the scheme in detail.
They decided that they would, in the wee hours of the morning, they would load the members of their families on the vessel and sail it out then into the harbor and beyond the Confederate battle stations, taking a tremendous risk.
One man said, "You know, I'm not afraid of any of this for myself, but I'm afraid of what they will do to my wife and family back here if I participate." Smalls was very generous. He said, "Okay, on the condition that you not tell anybody about our secret, we'll let you go." So they let the man go. And then he said, "This is very dangerous, and then we may be captured by Confederates. And if they capture us, they will put us to death." So he said to them, "I suggest that in case we are captured, we set dynamite to the boiler on the ship and blow it up, burn up ourselves at the same time. Better," he said, "to take our lives into our own hands than to turn ourselves over to the Confederates." They all agreed.
On the night of May 13, 1862, as they often did, the Confederate crew went home and left the black crew on board to guard the ship. This night, conditions were right. The Planter had just been loaded with ammunition, more than enough to blow it up if necessary. With their families huddled below, the Planter, with Robert Smalls impersonating the captain, approached Fort Sumter. He gave the signal and was allowed to pass.
And then the sentry on the Fort Sumter noticed that the boat had sped up, and he thought that was funny. So he called to the boat to halt. But by now, Smalls was out of the range of the Confederate fire, and he didn't stop. But now he was in real trouble because he was headed toward the Union fleet. Although he was sailing toward them to deliver the ship to them, and they did not know he was coming. So what to do? Well, apparently, Hannah, his wife, had brought a white bed sheet along. So Smalls ordered his men to take down the Confederate flag, take down the state of South Carolina flag, and put this white bed sheet up on the flagpole, which they did.
The Union naval blockade didn't fire on the ship and did allow it to come into its midst, and was very surprised to see this Confederate vessel now in the possession of enslaved African Americans who turned it over to them.
Smalls stepped up and said to the Union ship captain, "I'm Rob Smalls. I brought you the Planter. I thought it might be of some use to Uncle Abe." That's how the Planter became a Union ship and Smalls became free.
Robert Small's capture of the Planter was a sensation. It was reported from New York to London.
Robert Smalls very quickly became a major celebrity. Lots of slaves escaped during the Civil War. None of them escaped with as much enterprise or with as much Confederate property in their possession as Robert Smalls and the crew of the Planter.
The Union Navy quickly learned that they were getting much more than just a new ship.
When Smalls was taken into Union custody and debriefed, they were overjoyed. They knew that the ship was valuable, and as they debriefed Smalls, they learned how much he knew about the Confederate defenses, and even more valuable than the ship.
Robert Smalls really challenged the whole theoretical basis of slavery, because here was someone who was intelligent enough, who was courageous enough, who was confident enough to engineer really this dramatic and extraordinary escape right out from under the noses of the superior race. So there's this feeling that there has to be some sort of retribution for that, and so the state of South Carolina actually places a $50,000 bounty on his head.
The bounty did not frighten Smalls. He was prepared to fight and joined the Union Navy as a non-commissioned pilot. As the war entered its second year, most Southern white men had been called into the Army. Many of the enslaved took this opportunity to flee.
It clearly revealed that without the patrol system in the South, which basically dissipated when the war started, there was nothing to restrain them, keep them from running away. And so as a result, they ran away by the hundreds and then eventually by the thousands.
As thousands of escaped slaves made it to Union lines, some field commanders put them to work in non-combat jobs. Unlike the Navy, which had a few African-American sailors, the Army would not permit blacks to fight.
From Lincoln's perspective, or from the perspective of most Northerners, this is a white man's war for Union. This war has nothing to do with slavery, and it has nothing to do with black people.
From the time he took office, Lincoln's policy was focused on keeping the 4 slave-owning border states in the Union. Lincoln believed that without Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, the North was doomed. "I hope God is on our side," the president told a reporter, but I must have Kentucky.
In fact, there's this very interesting conversation between Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, in which Frederick Douglass says that, you're fighting this war with a strong right hand behind your back. Even though you're concerned about maintaining the loyalty of the border states, the United States would be better off to accept the service of thousands, tens of thousands of African-American troops.
And by 1862, the relentless movement of fleeing slaves into Union lines and their insistent demand to be allowed to fight made the issue unavoidable. In August, the Federal War Department authorized mustering an army of 5,000 black men in South Carolina. Robert Smalls volunteered to help recruit the 1st South Carolina colored troops. Within the year, black regiments were being created all across the Union. The response was overwhelming.
Wherever it's possible, you have masses of men volunteering for the Army. It's people all over the North coming to Massachusetts to volunteer for the Massachusetts 54 and 55th, in South Carolina for the 1st Colored Infantry.
Now officially allowed to fight, they had to fight not only the Confederate Army, they had to fight within the Union ranks as well. Racism was rampant. At first, black soldiers received only half pay, but still, they came.
It's important to understand that from the beginning of the war, black people have a commitment to their own freedom and determination to seize what they see as a critical opening, which will change their lives and change the lives of their descendants ever.
The influx of new soldiers was having an impact, but Lincoln wanted to choke the Southern resistance. Despite opposition within the Republican Party, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. It sent shockwaves to the South. Although the proclamation only freed slaves in the rebel states that were beyond the control of the Union Army, To African Americans, it meant freedom was on the horizon.
Those enslaved people who heard about the proclamation, because oftentimes they placed the broadest possible interpretation on it. And even if the literal words did not apply to them because of geographical limitations, they applied the proclamation to themselves.
A proclamation was issued by the president.
All over the South, African Americans took up the cause of freedom.
The following, to wit, that on the first day of January AD 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state.
Even soldiers who had already freed themselves by making it to the Union lines gathered to hear the words read aloud.
Shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. And the executive government.
The call for freedom had been sounded.
Or any of them.
By issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln was able to change the war from simply a war to keep the Union together, a war to crush a rebellion, into a holy war, a fight for freedom.
For African Americans, it was the dawn of a new day. But the war was far from over. In the North, anger over the proclamation caused enlistments by white men to fall off. The federal government responded with an unpopular draft. As the 1864 election neared, Lincoln feared defeat because of the proclamation. But Union victories in Virginia and the capture of Atlanta transformed the national mood. The president won with 55% of the vote. Then on April 9, 1865, with his army down to less than 8,000 men, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered. The war was almost over. Five days after the surrender, exactly 4 years to the day the Civil War had begun, a celebration was held at Fort Sumter to raise the American flag once again of the fort.
And there was tremendous rejoicing on that day as thousands of people journeyed out to Fort Sumter.
By the time that celebration in Charleston Harbor occurred, Robert Smalls fought in 17 battles in which he risked his life for the Union cause. So he was a military hero at the end of the war. And when this occurred, he was one of the celebrities who was included on the ceremony.
This celebration was terribly consequential because what it did was confirm that the war was over with and that this was a new day in South Carolina, a new day throughout the length and breadth of the South.
All over the country, African Americans rejoiced. But their joy would not last. That same night, Abraham Lincoln was shot in a Washington theater. Within hours, the great emancipator was dead.
Smalls said he cried like a baby and prayed, Lord, have mercy on us all.
The country wondered, what now? Lincoln hadn't finalized his plans to reintegrate the Union, but with the South in shambles, the region needed reconstruction. Every level of society had to be rebuilt. Now free, African Americans were faced with many challenges, but their greatest challenge was freedom itself.
African Americans, although greatly desirous of freedom, were not really sure what exactly would be entailed by that concept.
In a world built on slavery, to say you were not enslaved anymore, what does it mean? Who's free? Does that mean you're going to become a white person? Does that mean you're going to be able to own property?
It's an abstract kind of a concept that really could only be determined by what people did.
If you read accounts of life in the South in the immediate aftermath of the war, what you will read over and over again is about large numbers of African Americans who are traveling the roads. It's very interesting because the former slaveholders say that these people are just wandering around aimlessly. They weren't wandering around aimlessly. They were looking for friends and relatives that had been sold away.
One of the most heartrending sights in and after the war publications is columns called Lost Friends, in which people are looking for their families. People trying to get together.
They were, by their actions, giving the lie to this notion that family didn't mean anything, that these connections had been broken, that they didn't care anything about these people who had been sold away. And that's precisely what they did care about, and what they were trying to do is to reconstitute families, to find mothers and fathers and relatives and friends.
All over the South, African Americans set out to become part of the new society. With the help of the Federal Freedmen's Bureau, churches in the North and South and individuals worked together to open schools for the newly freed slaves. Freed people of all ages wanted one of the most basic rights denied them during slavery: to learn to read and write. Many others opened businesses or sought work for pay. For former slaves, it was the first time they could negotiate work contracts and buy land. They knew that owning land was the key to inclusion in the new America. Still others turned their attention to becoming part of the new political system. But the new president was a Southern Democrat named Andrew Johnson.
In the first weeks after he takes office, he sets about providing almost wholesale pardons for many of those who have been the major leaders of the Confederacy.
The former Confederates had only one major requirement before being readmitted to the Union. They had to accept the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, and all would be forgiven. Republicans in Congress were outraged. They impeached President Johnson, who escaped removal by a single vote. Then, Congress took over Reconstruction and immediately made changes to the Constitution.
The 14th Amendment to the Constitution said that your right of citizenship is not dependent on race. And the 15th Amendment said that you could not deny a person the right to vote because of the person's race.
By the time you get to the spring of 1867, African Americans have a new sense of government, a new sense of what government means. After all, it was government that would in fact take the steps to incorporate African American men into the body politic.
With the ability to vote and enter politics, many African Americans who had fled the South returned home.
At the end of the war, Smalls came back to Beaufort, where he purchased a house where he'd grown up as a slave, where his mother had worked as a slave. His mother now was presiding over this house as a free person. She'd been presiding over it for a long time for the McKee family, and now she was doing it for her son. Then Smalls went fairly quickly into politics.
The Beaufort Republican Club became the base of Robert Small's political career, and Robert Smalls went all over the county, canvassing, as they said, but campaigning. He proved himself to be a very clever orator, great at repartee and dramatic in his oratory, and often aggressive and colorful and all those things. The black population of the Seattleans responded immediately to Robert Smalls. And so this was the beginning of his political career.
In the spring of 1868, Robert Small was elected to the South Carolina State House of Representatives, where he joined the black majority in the legislature. It was the only state in the Union to be dominated politically by African Americans. South Carolina, where the Civil War had begun, would become a major proving ground for Reconstruction. Across the country, African Americans entered political life at every level of society.
If you make this comparison between 1860, when 90% of black people were slaves, and 1868, 1870, when you've got African Americans who are in state legislatures, they are black mayors and police chiefs, there are blacks in the U.S. Senate, in the U.S. House of Representatives. They are literally revolutionizing American politics.
Although their overall numbers were small, their mere presence was too much for the old Southern establishment.
That was very radical. I mean, white folks, they just couldn't imagine that. I mean, social equality, political equality, oh my, it was just beyond their comprehension that such a radical thing could occur so fast.
And so when the social fabric begins to rip from the perspective of white Southerners, what they know to do is to respond with overwhelming violence. And they do. The Ku Klux Klan emerges throughout the South.
They do unspeakable things. They do the things that you would think of terrorists doing. They blow things up, they kill people, they do all kinds of other things that you would normally associate with political terrorism.
These were very dangerous times. These white terrorists, really, because that's what they would properly be called, were committed to stopping at nothing, to eliminating the black body politic.
No Republican was immune, black or white. And the thousands of federal troops stationed in the South were not enough to stop the violence. In South Carolina, State Representative Robert Brown Elliott spearheaded hearings to investigate Klan activities. Elliott's success in getting some of the Klan to confess to their tactics convinced him that he could do something about the intimidation. He once said, "We have suffered much and may suffer more. Let us not be driven from our position by any threats." In November 1870, Elliott was elected to the U.S. Congress. He took his crusade against the Klan.
Convince the federal government that more work needs to be done to protect the rights of citizens. And he particularly wanted to catch the ear of President Ulysses Grant.
But Grant's only major Reconstruction plan was an attempt to annex the Caribbean island of Santo Domingo in the hopes that African Americans would want to relocate there. Despite Grant's plan, Elliott, along with other Republican leaders, continued lobbying the president. In April of 1871, their efforts paid off. Grant signed the Ku Klux Klan Act, aimed at giving the federal courts the power to jail the Klan's leaders. In October, Grant declared martial law in 9 South Carolina counties due to the condition of lawlessness. It would be the only time the military power of the act would be used. By 1874, when Robert Smalls was elected to Congress, the Klan Act had been effective, but now there was a new problem. Groups called rifle clubs had taken their place. In South Carolina, the Red Shirt Rifle Club became notorious.
The Red Shirts essentially were the Confederate Army recidivists. The command structure of the Red Shirt regiments preserved the command structure of actual Confederate regiments. These were Confederate veterans who were now under, in many cases, the very same officers that they had served under during the American Civil War. And so the organization of the Red Shirts was really a way to bring resistance out into the open.
In 1876, just 8 years after the first interracial elections, violence against Southern Republicans was out of control. Smalls took to the floor of Congress to urge his fellow congressmen to keep the pressure on the South. He told them about a letter he had received, testifying to the level of violence. The letter began,
"These were facts which I vouch for entirely, and are not distorted in any degree. It's a plain, unvarnished narration of painful and horrible truths."
On July 4th, 1876, a local plantation owner drove his buggy down a public road in Hamburg, South Carolina, where a black militia troop was drilling.
The local plantation owner insisted on being allowed to drive right through this muster field. The black militia refused to move. They almost come to blows.
After a few tense moments, the troop leader, Doc Adams, ordered his men to break ranks and allowed the carriage to pass.
All along, whites in that area had been waiting for a kind of a provocation that they could use to rally their forces. And so local Democratic leaders rally white Democrats in that area, and when the local black militia found out what was happening, they held up in a building, and the whites began to lay siege to that building. Ultimately, the black militiamen were forced to surrender.
When they surrender, particular members of Doc Adams' militia are picked out. call them out one by one, and they shoot them in the head. Then they tell the rest to flee. As they begin to flee into the woods, many of them are shot in the back.
That was a turning point, because not only did it scare African Americans, but it showed white Democrats that this was the moment, this was the trajectory you could take if you really wanted to turn the clock back on Reconstruction.
In the South, the days leading up to the presidential election of 1876 became even more violent. In the North, Republicans grew weary of the plight of the freedom. When the governor of Mississippi asked for federal troops to halt widespread violence against black voters, Grant said there was no use saving Mississippi if it would cost the Republicans Ohio.
There was sort of this general feeling that let's just give the white South what they want, which the white South said, what we want is to be left alone, to shape our own social institutions, which is a very polite, very Southern way of saying we want to be able to control our former slaves.
At great personal risk, African Americans held political meetings to get out the vote. But the Democrats smelled victory. On November 7th, 1876, everyone who dared went to the polls. The day after the election, there were accusations of vote tampering in 3 southern states: Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina.
In fact, there's 2 returns come from all 3 of these states. One set of returns say that the Democrats had won the election. Another set says that the Republicans had won the election. And this, of course, leads to an impasse in Congress, and they decide then to appoint a commission.
As the commission argued whether the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes or the Democrat Samuel L. Tilden should become president, the March 4th inauguration deadline loomed. Robert Small spoke about the continued violence against Republicans in his state.
The Democratic Party pursued a policy calculated to drive from the state every white man who would refuse to join them in their attempts to deprive the Negro of the rights guaranteed him by the Constitution of the United States.
Debate dragged on. The struggle for freedom was in jeopardy.
And hence the basis of a bargain which will allow Rutherford B. Hayes to assume the presidency.
On the evening of February 26, 1877, just 6 days before the inauguration deadline, a clandestine meeting between representatives of both candidates took place at the Wormley Hotel in Washington, D.C.
They've sort of come to an agreement that we're no longer concerned about the rights of African Americans as voters, and to put the Negro question on the back burner and not worry about it anymore. And they literally turn African Americans over to the South.
In other words, to remove the final forces of the federal government providing protection in the South for black and white Republicans. Well, the deal is struck.
And so this is the infamous then compromise of 1877.
The message that goes out to African Americans was that the destiny of African Americans was not at all connected to the destiny of the nation. And this is a very different situation than the situation which developed during the Civil War. Because one of the things that we understand and understand very clearly is that when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Lincoln, Lincoln was saying that the destiny of African Americans was linked directly to the destiny of the nation. We would rise or fall together. And now, with the rise of Rutherford B. Hayes as Republican president, now Republicans were essentially saying that the country can get along very well without you.
After the Compromise of 1877, African Americans found themselves increasingly forced out of politics. Across the South, black Republicans were simply removed from their posts. Robert Smalls, a U.S. congressman who could not be removed, was charged with corruption, jailed, and eventually pardoned.
They did to Robert Smalls what they did to a lot of prominent black politicians at that time. And those charges haunted Robert Smalls for the rest of his life. But Robert Smalls was a very brave man, not just stealing the planter, but his fighting in 17 battles in the Civil War. He wasn't afraid of gunfire. He wasn't afraid of standing up to people who were armed when he was not. He had immense personal courage.
Robert Smalls never gave in. To the disdain of the Democrats, he continued to run and be re-elected from his predominantly black district for 9 more years. His leadership would give hope to his people in the years of uncertainty to come. Across the South, Democratic leaders did all they could to erase Reconstruction from their minds and from the law.
Gradually, African American voters are intimidated to the point where they all but cease to be allowed to vote.
Mississippi passed a series of laws that allowed legal discrimination against African Americans in almost every phase of life. State after state in the South followed suit. As the old slave system was turned into a new system of servitude, many African Americans stayed to fight on the soil they had always called home. Others took their fate into their own hands and joined the movement west. Black churches became more than ever the political cornerstone of their communities. Through them, African Americans kept faith in the American dream. Ministers preached, as they had during slavery, that liberation would come.
The period of Reconstruction is a very instructive period in American society. It is America, in some ways, at its racial worst. But there are glimmers of America at its racial best.
This moment when people, with everything in the world, including history against them, had exercised both democracy and political power, real political power.
Their attempt at the first interracial democracy was stalled, but the groundwork had been laid. Although it would be almost 100 years until the second Reconstruction, their struggle would not be in vain.
Out of Reconstruction come the basic tools that allow the modern civil rights movement to establish important victories in the 1960s. Without the 14th Amendment, without the 15th Amendment, the civil rights movement would have had very little foundation upon which to build. So that Reconstruction really does have an important impact on all of the generations that follow. It would be too simple to say that Reconstruction was a total failure. It wasn't a total failure. There was a period of time when America provided a ray of hope.
He took on America for us.
A century after slavery, he still fought for freedom.
By any means necessary.
On the 40th anniversary of his assassination, see the Emmy and Peabody Award-winning portrait of one of America's most complex figures.
Do you consider yourself militant? I consider myself Malcolm.
Malcolm X, Make It Plain, on American Experience, Monday at 9, 8 Central on most PBS stations.
Slavery and the Making of America is available on DVD or VHS for $79.99. The companion book is $35 and the CD soundtrack $16.98. To order, call 1-800-336-1917 or write to the address on your screen. Experience more of the personal stories, triumphs, and challenges enslaved people faced at pbs.org. Learn more about the continuing efforts of enslaved and free Black Americans to gain equal rights under the law.
Nana bine bibia beno, se nana mayetin semfo, o se aye. O subetom brahma for boy, ebe koro sana bine.
At New York Life, we know that learning from the past helps create a better future. We support this PBS program as part of our commitment to understanding the stories that shaped our nation. Guided by our values, financial strength, integrity, and humanity, New York Life has been part of America's story since 1845. Thank you for joining us in exploring the defining moments of our nation's history.
We are PBS. 13's Black Heritage Celebration is made possible by
107.5 WBLS, celebrating African American heritage, striving for unity in the family, and keeping you connected to the community. 107.5 WBLS.
Hello, I'm Bill Baker. Raising sufficient funds to support a vibrant cultural enterprise like 13 has always been a challenge. But in tough economic times, when government, corporate, and foundation support are all uncertain, that challenge becomes even more intense. We continue to create television that encourages you to be more, not to buy more. We speak to your values and heighten your experience in a world we strive to improve. This is your moment to become a partner in everything we do here. Please call 1-800-272-1313 or contact us online at 13.org. And in return, you'll receive our promise for more television of lasting value and the highest in ethics. Thank you.
Tonight on Charlie Rose, director of the Center on the United States and Europe, Philip H. Gordon, author James B. Stewart, and the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show's Best in Show.
Expect a masterpiece.
What else do you do with them?
Tensions rise between the Germans and the locals.
Look at Rosella Kay.
He intends to protect her in return for certain favors, which is why she has to hide.
Leading to a final desperate plot.
Fancy a trip to England? I hear you need a boat. If you're caught, then I am too, and that's the way I want it. I won't be caught.
Bad news! You bloody little boys in your bloody war!
Island at War on Masterpiece Theater.
Join us Sunday night at 9 on 13. Thanks to our members and the following: for their support of 13's programming today.
He dreamed the unthinkable.
An airplane with the ability to fly into the substratosphere.
He created the impossible.
That is a future.
But when a corrupt system tried to break him,
who the hell are you?
He did the unforgettable.
Don't tell me I can't do it. Don't tell me it can't be done.
You could lose everything.
Well, I won't.
From director Martin Scorsese comes the true story of an American hero. The Aviator, rated PG-13, now playing.
Wealth management at UBS. It's about asking the right questions, continually assessing your needs, frequently monitoring your portfolio, and always listening. You and us. UBS.
Hi, I'm Lara Spencer. Next time on Antiques Roadshow.
This happens to be one of the most sought-after guitars in the world. Really?
Oh my gosh.
What?
Don't miss our visit to Memphis, Tennessee next time on Antiques Roadshow.
Enjoy Roadshow, Monday night at 8 on 13.
The best thing about receiving my GED is now I can reach my dream, go on to higher learning.
I want to get a better job, and I want to become a teacher's aide.
At 82, I finally got my GED. After all these years, I've been dreaming about it, and it's come true.
Con Edison helped all of us improve our lives.
They've supported 13's Literacy Center
since 1989.
Thanks, 13, and thanks, Con Edison.
He took on America for us.
A century after slavery, he still fought for freedom.
By any means necessary.
On the 40th anniversary of his assassination, Malcolm X, Make It Plain on American Experience.
Experience history, Monday night at 9 on 13. 13 salutes Cisco Systems, whose support of the National Teacher Training Institute is helping teachers nationwide to effectively integrate technology into classroom learning. We thank Cisco for its exceptional generosity and commitment to education.
Next time, these are the men of Dog Company fighting in Iraq.
When the war kicked off, I was still in high school.
And this is their story.
Are you okay, Garcia?
My job's not to die for my country. My job's to make the other poor bastard die for his country. A company of soldiers. Watch Frontline.
Tuesday night at 9 on 13.
I'm Paul Kangas with the Nightly Business Report News Brief. Upbeat earnings at Hewlett-Packard. Computing giant beat the street tonight with fiscal first quarter earnings of 37 cents a share, 3 cents above estimates. Revenues jumped almost 10% to $21.5 billion. The results come just 1 week after HP's controversial CEO, Carly Fiorina, was ousted. Wall Street was narrowly mixed, helped by upbeat remarks on the economy from Fed Chief Greenspan, but hurt by a jump in oil prices. The Dow lost 2 points. The Nasdaq fell 1 3/4. Standard & Poor's 500 managed to gain a fraction. Tomorrow, how one healthcare company is finding ways to save lives and money. Watch Nightly Business Report at 6:30 here on 13.
Welcome to the broadcast. Tomorrow there'll be a document released called A Compact Between the United States and Europe that addresses the principal issues that divide Europe and the United States. Philip Gordon was part of that effort, and he talks about the document this evening.
The sort of conventional wisdom that has been out there for a few years now, that Americans and Europeans just see the world too differently. And we're going our separate ways, and we can't do this. It's too hard. What we did in this compact, by pulling these people together, is show that, no, it's not too hard. It is hard, and there are differences. But the overall outcome is worth making specific compromises on some of these hard things.
Also this evening, James Stewart talks about his new book, a controversial book about the Walt Disney Company and its CEO, Michael Eisner.
I did initially think it would be looking at the interplay of commerce and culture and how product is created and how the Disney values are reflected in the product. You know, remnants of that book are in there, the making of Pirates of the Caribbean, the rise of reality TV, and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But in the middle of all this, while I had a ringside